Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The government paid an estimated $4.5 billion for federal employees not to work under the deferred resignation program offered last year. The calculation comes from a new data report from the Partnership for Public Service. The organization's report calculates other cost expenditures, all tied back to the Trump administration's overhauls to the federal workforce. Federal News Network's Drew Friedman is here with more details on the report. Drew, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Terry. Nice to see you.
Hey, refresh us, in case people might have forgotten, what the DRP was all about last year.
This started in early 2025 as the Trump administration was taking rapid steps to try to downsize the federal workforce. If you'll recall, in late January, actually, of 2025 was when the Office of Personnel Management first announced the, quote, fork in the road offer, essentially allowing eligible federal employees to choose to leave their jobs, sign some paperwork, and then get put on paid administrative leave for many months until September for most of 2025. At the end of the day, an estimated 137,000 federal employees ended up opting into the deferred resignation program, either through that initial offer from OPM or later offers from their specific agencies. But the amount of time that federal employees spent on paid administrative leave varied based on what agency they worked for when they signed that separation agreement. So we never necessarily had a clear number or estimate on how much this was all costing to pay these employees not to work for those many months. At the same time, we've still seen this playing out. There's some agencies like the Interior Department are still offering new rounds for taking the DRP. There's also been a number of lawsuits that many of which are still playing out to this day.
So how did the partnership do the math to calculate the impact of the DRP?
They broke down based on various reports and government resources and articles and just tried to do an estimated calculation of how many federal employees spent how many weeks each on the deferred resignation program and being paid through that after they'd already left their jobs. What they found was there was a range from just about 1 week on the DRP up to about 30 weeks. So huge range there, but the most common one was about 8.5 weeks. 86,000 employees were paid for that amount of time. Another 34,000 employees were paid for 17 weeks each. So there's a huge range here. But what they did was calculate those numbers of weeks multiplied by an average weekly salary of about $2,000 for federal employees, and then tack on an additional percentage to take into account the cost of benefits. And that's essentially how they arrived at that $4.5 billion number.
So it's a rough order of magnitude, but still gives us a pretty good picture of how impactful this was.
Absolutely. It's not an exact science by any measure. It's certainly just an estimate here. But they said that they took, the information and the data that was available to try to get as close as they could on that calculation.
And the report details the impact of some of the other programs like RIFs and reduction in probationary employees. What did they find there?
There's also a number of costs associated with those. As you'll recall, in early 2025, there were firings of many probationary employees across government. Some were then either put on paid administrative leave or brought back and rehired, either due to court orders or just agencies changing their mind. There was also a number of reductions in force or RIFs across agencies. So just a whole mash of everything going on in 2025. What the partnership found in their report is that there was about $440 or so million paid to probationary employees who were on paid administrative leave as some of those legal challenges played out in court. There was another $12 million spent to then rehire some of those who were previously terminated, and then about $760 million or so within a 1-year time frame that was paid to severance payments for employees who were removed from their jobs as part of a RIF. And then another interesting statistic that they included was they calculated the costs of activities and personnel through the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, and found that there was about $81 million in spending there, while DOGE was set out to create efficiencies. According to the partnership's president and CEO, Max Stier, he says that those DOGE activities created more chaos without generating savings. And he spoke a little bit more about the organization's findings here.
The choices that have been made to date, which have been non-strategic without any appreciation of consequence, have been what have been so costly. You know, if you're going to make changes to your workforce, you don't need to start out the gate by putting all the large elements of your workforce under administrative leave. You need to think about what the downstream impact is of letting people go rather than firing them and then rehiring them.
Drew, has the Trump administration offered any comment on this report about the DRP and the other things they are doing to generate efficiencies?
We have seen in the past some Trump administration officials pushing back against similar cost estimates. There was one report last year led by Senate Democrats showing a similar type of report on costs and expenditures to the government. And essentially what they say is that the deferred resignation program and some of those other efforts were designed to help create efficiencies and create cost savings. When Scott Cooper has talked about this, the OPM director in 2025, he says that the DRP was, meant to give employees a clear option for leaving their jobs as the Trump administration tried to cut down workforce size. And he argues that the program will create cost savings of $20 billion per year. So he says that the 4.5 billion or whatever calculation you go by is sort of irrelevant in this case. That's the stance that the administration has taken there. And then more broadly, too, if you look at where things are going, we've seen a lot of these agenda items outlined in the president's management agenda, in the White House's new budget proposal, towards trying to continue downsizing the workforce by eliminating what they call non-essential federal jobs, shrinking government programs, and then also downsizing the real estate portfolio for the government. So this effort towards, continuing to shrink things down, I think, is very much still a narrative from the Trump administration.
Are they getting any more particular or specific about where the efficiencies will actually come from if they don't come from salaries?
It seems like some of those details may be in the budget proposal. I mean, they've talked about just generally trying to cut down budget for a lot of civilian agencies, even while looking to increase defense spending. So, I think that that's where they may be laying out more of their specific efforts on where they're trying to cut costs. But, there's certainly been, the partnership is not the only or the first organization to be questioning how much these stated costs and stated efforts towards efficiency are, how they're playing out in reality.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for walking us through this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You can find her full story at federalnewsnetwork.com.